This is the second part of the story. If you want to watch the first part, you can see the link in the description. Enjoy! I turned in a circle, realizing the futility of trying to escape. I ran my hands through my hair and kept them on my head as she approached. All I could do was watch her approach. I could only stare at her, helpless, pathetic in my pain. "What?" she asked to explain my silence. "I just wanted to see if you had any idea how beautiful you were," I said sadly, "and I wanted to know how the hell I was going to get over you." "You don't have to," she replied quietly. "Yes, I really do," I said. "And it's going to take a while, Stacy, but I'll be fine in the end." "Please don't do this," she pleaded. "I live that scene every day, Troy. I don't know why I did what I did." I panicked and ran away. "For God's sake, Troy, I was only 21 years old and I felt trapped." She grabbed my hands to keep me from leaving. "When I came to you for our first date, you knew about my history with David," she said. "You knew that and you pursued me anyway. How are you different from David?" "I never lied to you. I always told you I cared about him. Every damn time you asked me why I was with him when he treated me like that. Don't you remember, Troy? I told you I was with him because I loved him. I told you that every damn time. But you still came back to me, and every time you looked at me. The way your eyes lit up when I was around you, Troy, do you have any idea how that made me feel? You treated me like a queen, and I realized I was falling in love with you. I hated the way David treated me, but I was conflicted. You spent every second you could with me. You'd come over and help me do my homework, wash my car, or just hang around. You spent time with my father to be on his good side. I wish I had $1 for every chess game I saw you lose to him or listened to him talk about his business. David kept cheating on me, and the next thing I knew, I was cheating on him with you. You kept asking me out, and I started to accept that we were a couple and David was a thing of the past. But it still pissed me off that he was seeing other girls. One of the reasons David and I were having problems was that he constantly wanted my cherry. When I kept resisting, he threw me down to be eaten by girls who were dropping their panties. I was furious about that. You never gave me ultimatums, and I was able to relax knowing I could go at my own pace, and I fell in love with you. Of course we didn't have sex, we just kissed a lot. But if you'd put any pressure on me at all, we would have, and you knew it. But you also knew that I wanted it to mean something when I wore white to my wedding. But always in the back of my mind, I couldn't understand why David let me go. Why didn't he fight for me? How could he let me go to you? Back then, you and I were in college and our lives were scheduled. How we were going to get married and have kids. But while you continued to focus, I was still caught up in my own questions. And unbeknownst to you, David came to me and asked me to take him back. And I was trapped between the two of you. On the one hand, I had Mr. Serious, hardworking, reliable, and loyal to me. On the other, Mr. Fun, dangerous, carefree, and unreliable. I know it sounds like a cliche, but you two made me feel complete. When we had that night, I panicked and ran and hurt you that I shouldn't have hurt you. I was so ashamed of what I had done that I kept running. I ran to Europe. I ran to California after I got married because my father banished me. It didn't change anything, Troy. No matter where I ran, you were still in my thoughts. So I decided to come home and meet you face to face. I owe you a debt of gratitude. My life is not going the way I wanted it to. I hate my life with David. I hate that he never stopped cheating on me, Troy. But it's not like in high school when he cheated on me like he always did. I had you to make me feel better then. And now he's cheating on me and I'm all alone, Troy. The reality is that I belong to you. I made a bad mistake and I'm going to take care of it, Troy. Yes, but there is one big difference between our realities, Stacy. The day after you ruined me, you were still with David. And the next day, and the next. You didn't come back to me. I'm still trapped in a hell I didn't choose. I wake up every day knowing that the woman I love is with another man. Don't you understand, Stacy? You made your choice. And the subsequent circumstances will never allow us to be together, so please let me go. My heartbreaking, pitiful plea brought unshed tears to her eyes. I pulled apart her embrace. I'm just going to leave, Stacy. Tonight was a mistake, just another big mistake. Where she got the strength from, I have no idea. But she grabbed my wrist and pressed my palm against her tit with force. She looked up at me and said, "Now try to get away." She kept pressing my hand against hers, and God help me, I began to squeeze it gently, and then I moved toward her and began to kiss her. She nestled into my arms in agreement. I immediately took in her familiar body, yet so different after 6 years of change. I tried to trace her new form clad in a dress. She moved her foot toward mine to prolong the contact. I immediately stiffened to the discomfort of my pants. "Please, Stacy, stop this now!" I gasped between kisses. She kept throwing herself at me, and I kept fighting myself. The most telling thing was that I didn't fight her off. I didn't reject her. I met every moment of her passion with my own. She lifted one foot off the ground and rubbed against me. In response, she sat on top of me while I held her in my arms. Slowly, she lowered her pelvis to the ground, pressing herself into me. "Stacy, I can't. If I do this, I'll be no better than David. I don't have much left, but my conscience won't let me do it. If your marriage is so terrible, leave him. Divorce him and find someone who will make you happy. There is too much history between us to overcome. Too much animosity and bad blood for us to overcome. Your father will destroy me, or I will destroy him. There is no other way. I'm tired of you hurting me, Stacy. You have to realize that I will always love you. All this time, all this pain, all my pretend hatred for you. It's killing me, Stacy. I'll never forget you, but I need there to be an end between us. I need to be able to consider you my friend, despite what's about to happen. If we continue tonight, I promise you that you will hate me, or I will hate you for the rest of our lives." My explanation was the catalyst for her tears as we continued to hug each other. Right in front of David Porter. As soon as I moved away from Stacy, he delivered a punch to my jaw. I fell back down on the seat of my pants, disoriented by the blow. In a daze, I watched Stacy stop David from finishing me off with his legs, and I sat up, trying to clear my brain. Fortunately for me, David was followed outside by several of his henchmen, including Fred Carter, who watched me with a chuckle. The rest of the group joined Stacy to physically restrain him from maiming or killing me. David continued to yell at me, threatening me with death when he was finally dragged away. I continued to sit on the ground as the nausea and dizziness gradually passed. I groaned when I was finally able to stand up. Once again, I had a ridiculous thought. No one would forget this 10th reunion. I limped home literally and figuratively, all the while fighting to keep the contents of my stomach from revolting against me. Staggering up the stairs and limping, I walked to the refrigerator. I scooped some ice into a rag and applied it to the sorest spot. Physical pain. Nothing helped with the heartstrings that had just been torn. Something strange was happening to my body. I found it hard to make my body follow the commands my brain was giving me. I felt something wet and damp running down my neck. I finally managed to bring my hand up to it, and with my vision slightly unfocused, I saw blood on my fingers. After what seemed like an eternity, I was able to dial 911 on my phone's speed dial, and gasping, told them of my predicament. Fearing that I had a concussion from David's blows, I decided to try to stay awake until the ambulance arrived. When they arrived and took me to the emergency room, I had already lost consciousness. The medical staff fussed around explaining my symptoms and how I was in this condition. I just told them that someone had a fight with me and left it at that. The consensus was that I had a concussion, aggravated by damage to my inner ear, which should go away without complications. I ended up being kept overnight to monitor my condition should it change. Early the next morning, a couple of visitors came to see me. The chief of police of Camden, along with the captain of detectives, came into my room. When I saw them, I thought they were going to interrogate me to find out who had beaten me up. So I was already mentally prepared for that scenario when they started laying out the curves. Their concern was not who I had gotten into a fight with, but how I could explain my whereabouts after the fight. Specifically, when I called 911 and whether anyone was with me before the ambulance arrived. I advised them to contact the ambulance service and the hospital to satisfy their curiosity about my timeline. If they had any other questions, they could contact my attorney, I informed them. Both men left with frowning faces. In a normal situation, I would have gladly agreed to help the police, but the hostile attitude made my radar wary. Within an hour, I found out why. News had traveled around the hospital that Stacy Porter was being cared for in the emergency room and had been assigned a bed in the intensive care unit. She had been beaten to a pulp by an unknown assailant and was in a coma from her injuries and the medication she was being treated with. My attempts to see her were easily thwarted by the medical staff, and I felt frustrated that I couldn't figure out what had happened. No doubt my attempts to see her would have added to the rumor mills. My hospital stay was extended a couple more days because the attending physician wanted to make sure I didn't have any extenuating circumstances related to the concussion. There were only 2 circumstances that I was aware of. First of all, I hadn't heard a word from Janet, my bride-to-be, all weekend. I could only assume that she had heard about the spectacle at the country club and was angry with me. Secondly, I had the misfortune to see David Porter as a visitor. Turning, I saw him standing in the doorway of my room. A gloating grin indicated that he was thinking about my predicament. I continued to stare at him, savoring the results of my sneak attack. David, I can understand why you decided to fight with me, but why would you want to do that to Stacy? I asked. The grin grew even wider as he replied, Do what? I have no idea what you're talking about. The only one with a motive to harm Stacy is you, David. What are you going to do when Charles Bachman decides to intervene? Don't worry about it, Troy. He and I have an agreement, and the police have already gotten their orders. The perpetrator of the attack on Stacy is some unknown person. When Stacy recovers, she will be sent back to California to live with her sister. Charles Bachman and I will continue to do our usual business of running you out of town like a beaten dog. I shook my head sadly. Charles Bachman hates me that much? He let you beat up his daughter and try to blame it on me? He can't stand what you walk on. You constantly humiliate his family. What you and Stacy did at the school reunion was just icing on the cake. He fully approved of my measures to punish Stacy. David, I can almost understand why he hates me. But what have I done to you that you hate me to this extent? My question startled David. For a brief second, the anger in his eyes was replaced by a sense of doubt as he searched for an answer. Mister, Stacy is better than you. Mister, I think I'm better than everyone else, he replied stiffly. Did you think I was going to let you get away with stealing Stacy from me? You didn't allow anything, I quickly interjected. You dumped her, and I came up to you and told you I intended to ask her out. You didn't object. And you know what, asshole? I changed my mind and decided I wanted her, and I snuck into her pants every chance I got. And she still wouldn't let me, saying she was saving it for you. Hell, even when we went to Europe after she ran away from you, all she did was mope and cry for you. She still didn't want to sleep with me. I was so angry. Then we flew back to the city, and her father read her the riot act and told her she had to marry me because he wouldn't tolerate any more scandals from her. So we played the wedding under the gun, and she cried like a baby when I finally slept with her on our honeymoon. So I go off and have fun, and she sits at home and wishes she'd left her poor Troy behind, which is fine with me. Because when you're finally on the street, she can pick you up, as far as I'm concerned. I'll be running Bachman's Enterprises, and you'll be throwing garbage in the trash can if I can help it. David, I'll tell you once, you're going to have to go a long way to get rid of me, I replied, and don't think you're going to be able to kick my ass. Even after you hit me and kicked me, you didn't hold me back. I was already getting up to fight back when Stacy stopped the fight. I would have killed you. I said it offhandedly. The hint of David's inability to hold me weighed on him as he walked away. I wanted him to dwell on that fact. Somehow the days at the hospital went by unnoticed. Janet was still missing. I kept in touch with Tom Jenkins, who was doing business on my behalf. I was contemplating revealing to him aspects of the bank's affairs that he wasn't privy to when I got word that Stacy wanted to see me. When I entered her room, I shuddered when I saw the extent of her injuries, and my dislike was taken to a new level. How could someone do that to someone they were supposed to love? She invited me to sit by her bedside, and I took her frail hand. I suppose you heard I was banished again, she said weakly. I heard. I'm sorry, Troy. I didn't mean for you to get hurt. I guess that's the best I can do. She started crying. Shh, Stacy. It's not your fault. You need to get away. Get away from this because no matter how it ends, you're going to be hurt. Go to California. Start over. Find someone you can love and leave me and David and your father in the past. Don't look back, I commanded. I have someone I love here, she insisted, squeezing my hand tightly. I took my hand away. Will you love me if I destroy your father, Stacy? Because I intend to do it if I can. Can you bear the thought of being known in this town as the woman who betrayed her own father? I can't put you through that, Stacy. Remember the anecdote I told in my office? You mean the one where you hinted that I was a slut? she asked. You're not the whore, Stacy. It's me. You've submitted an offer worth millions of dollars. And I'm so eager to chase you that I'm willing to settle for your reputation being worth $5 in the end. I can't hurt you like that. You're too dangerous for me, Stacy. Go away and live in peace. I walked away, hearing the sobs echoing in the room. The day I was released, I went to the bank and thanked Tom Jenkins for his guidance in my absence. Janet's desk had been cleaned out, and her copy of the secret bank books was gone too. That evening, while I was in the attic of my apartment, I heard familiar footsteps approaching me. Hi, Janet, I said, not bothering to make sure it was her. I just stopped by to return your key, she replied. Okay, I replied neutrally. I waited. Mr. Buckman wants to meet you tomorrow night at the country club to discuss business with you, she informed me. Okay, I replied again. She waited for me to ask the questions I should have asked. For example, how she knew Charles Bachman and why he had chosen her to be his envoy. I was not inclined to oblige her. At last she left. I pulled into the parking lot of the country club, turned off the ignition, and just sat in my car. I paid no attention to the few passers-by who approached my car as they entered or exited the building. Gathering all the strength and energy I would need to see the meeting through, I began a series of deep breaths. Finally, I left my old beat-up Chevy among the immaculate Cadillacs, Lexuses, and Mercedes and walked to the entrance. The receptionist occupying the entrance was preparing for me to go through the hassle of announcing my name and the purpose of my visit, and then wait for an escort since I was not supposed to walk down the corridor alone. I walked past her as if she was invisible and paid no attention to her shocked face and protests as they subsided, and I continued down the hallway. Civility was not a priority in my current frame of mind. I wouldn't waste my energy on my subordinates today. As if out of thin air, Thomas Clark, the manager of the country club, appeared in front of me and kept pace with me. Good evening, Mr. Harrison. How nice to see you here again, he said cordially. I glanced at him. Thomas Clark was one of the few protesters who had opposed my family's expulsion from the country club. It was because of his talent for keeping an eye on the country club that he hadn't lost his job during the general unrest when Charles Bachman waged war against my family. Good evening, Mr. Clark. It's good to see you too. Despite my intentions, I felt it my duty to express my appreciation for his efforts. He nodded, and my companion and I continued down the corridor without a word. Mr. Bachman has reserved an office for your meeting today, he reminded me. We approached the office, and he seemed to want to say something else to me. I slowed down to give him that opportunity. With a concerned expression on his face, he began, Mr. Harry, Troy, if there's anything I can do for you after tonight. I was touched by his generosity. Thank you, Thomas. That means a lot to me, I assured him, and we walked into the office. The atmosphere of the country club office reflected old-school male domination in the best possible way. It wasn't that women were forbidden to be in the room. It was just that, due to history and heritage, they were not allowed to occupy it. In the large room, hunting trophies of various wild animals hung on the walls. On the walls hung photographs of various expeditions. I had a fleeting desire to see if any of these photos included the ones my father traveled to, or whether, in imitation of Stalinist Russia, he had been declared banned and the offending photos removed. The faint aroma of expensive cigars competed with the hickory and oak logs blazing in the huge stone fireplace. Light and shadows danced on the soft leather armchairs and sofas. The gleam of polished mahogany furniture, several of which were topped with Waterford crystal decanters filled with various whiskeys or liqueurs waiting to be consumed. Shelves littered with rare first editions of literary masterpieces, many autographed by the authors. In the corner stood a large globe, testifying to its antiquity, with unexplored parts of the world, names of forgotten countries, and shifting boundaries. And in the very center of the room, confidently dominating his universe, stood my nemesis, Charles Bachman. His son-in-law, my former friend David Porter, hovered nearby, serving as a companion. He stared at me, hesitant to attack. He stared at his father-in-law, desperately waiting for the signal to destroy me. I watched the enormous figure of Charles Bachman, remembering how he had bullied me years ago when I was courting Stacy. All the little derogatory remarks and jokes I'd endured while studying the chessboard during one of the games he'd insisted on playing while I waited for Stacy to get ready for her date. the inevitable gloating as he captured my king and pronounced, "Checkmate," signifying another of my defeats. "Troy Evans Williams," he said, as if giving me a death sentence. "It's been a long time since I've seen you." "Not long enough, Mr. Buckman," I replied. "You wanted to meet me, Mr. Buckman. So tell me why I'm here so I can leave here and go home." "Why don't we get a drink, Troy?" He called up the country club manager and asked him to go to the storage room and bring back a decanter of Remy Martin Louis Estate rare cask that the manager was storing for him. "I'm impressed, Mr. Bachman. How much does a bottle cost now?" "Last time I bought one of them, Troy, and it cost me about $25,000. "If I remember correctly, Mr. Bachman, the only time you raise a toast is when you make a business deal." "That's right, Troy. I made a very big business deal, and I feel like celebrating. Do you mind if I ask what you bought?" "Not at all, Troy," he commented, taking the decanter from the manager. Thomas Clark left the room while Charles Bachman poured healthy portions into 3 decanters of brandy and held one out to me. "I've just bought out the Camden Bank and Trust." He looked at me with his soulless eyes, waiting for my reaction. "Strange, I don't remember agreeing to sell it," I said calmly. David followed, picked up a 3rd decanter of brandy, and gave me a look of pure schadenfreude. "You're going to have to sell, Troy. On Monday, the state bank auditor will audit your bank. Copies of the real ledgers you've been hiding from everyone will be presented for inspection. After they compare them to the fake books you've been fooling everyone with, the investigation will begin. And then it's just a matter of following the trail, Troy," he explained cheerfully. "How did you find out about the books?" I asked. "Troy, I've always been 2 steps ahead of you," he chuckled, shaking the decanter of brandy to warm the drink. "I know about everything you do. I hate to see that you haven't paid attention to any of the business lessons I taught you so long ago. I know about the ridiculous files you keep on me, my daughter Stacy and my son-in-law David in your desk drawer. I know about all your business dealings, Troy." He paused to light a smuggled Cuban Cohiba cigar. I continued to wait patiently. "All of your business deals," he emphasized, blowing a ring of smoke. "Including the Soren oil deal you worked on. And as I said, I have access to copies of your books, Troy. It's going to make interesting reading across the country when this story comes out." "However, there is an alternative solution," Charles Bachman suggested. "If you turn the bank over to me, the actual books will never be reported. There will be no investigation, and you can walk away rather than spend the rest of your life in state prison on embezzlement charges." "Why would you want to acquire a failing bank, Mr. Bachman?" "You buy it and you'll have to service the accumulated debts," I asked, puzzled as to the reason. "Just call me sentimental, Troy. I'm thinking back to when you and Stacy were growing up. How you used to come over and play with her. Even when I thought you were going to be my son-in-law instead of David. I'm doing this for old time's sake. You're not tarnishing your mother and father's name. They wouldn't approve of their only child becoming a criminal." "As far as I'm concerned, you killed my parents, Mr. Bachman," I interjected angrily. "You tried to destroy me and my bank. And after everything you've done to me and my family, you're going to blackmail me into giving you the bank. And what happens to my customers when they can't make their car or house payments?" An irritated Charles Bachman replied, "The same thing will happen to my clients who fail will happen to everyone else. I'll foreclose on them. I'm in the business of making money, boy. If I told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. In nature, the big ones eat the little ones. That's a lesson neither you nor your father ever understood." "I can manage without you, Mr. Bachman. I have a deal ready to go involving Soren's oil reserves. Once the deal is signed, all my financial worries will be over. The money goes back to the bank and no one will ever know. Even if you denounce me, you'll have no way to prove it." Charles Bachman and David Porter laughed in my face. "You can't count on Soren's oil stocks, Troy. Unbeknownst to you, I've been buying up every stock that comes on the open market. I now own 63% of the stock, and that number keeps going up. I'll be richer than Bill Gates and Warren Buffett combined before it's over, and you'll be left in the dust, Troy." "Checkmate, Troy!" I remained silent while he and David enjoyed my obvious torment. He studied my discomfort as I began to search the room for an exit. Any way out? I glanced at the table where an ornate chess set stood ready for play. I remembered all the games I had played with Charles Bachman and lost. I continued to stare intently at the chessboard. Stanton's ebony pieces and their counterparts carved from ivory by a master craftsman many years ago. Now they waited in silence for the game. Charles Bachman followed my gaze and a smile flashed across his face. You know, Troy, it's been a while since we played chess. Why don't we make a little bet? If I win, David takes over as president of Camden Bank and Trust, and you go to jail. And if I win, suggested I, taking a sip of very expensive brandy. The very idea seemed to be a slap in the face to Charles Bachman. I could see him blushing and struggling to control himself over this ridiculous idea. He narrowed his eyes and said, If you win, you will remain president of Camden Bank and Trust and work for me for the rest of your life and not go to jail. If it weren't for the fact that you've never beaten me at chess, I might have lost on purpose to keep you under control. But I think it would be best if you left this town with your tail between your legs. He hissed angrily at me. He turned away and grabbed a couple of chess pieces, shielding himself from my gaze. He turned to me again and extended both fists at arm's length. There were pawns hidden in his hands. All I had to do was guess correctly, and I would start with white and gain the advantage of the initial move. He continued to wait for me to decide which hand I wanted open. I waited half a minute before I put the palm of my right hand under the left fist of Charles Bachman. A knowingly victorious glint appeared in his eyes as he moved the pawn into my hand. I clenched my hand into a fist, and the pawn remained undisclosed to everyone. Since I know I have a black pawn in my hand, I have chosen your remaining hand. I will start with white. I opened my hand to show the black pawn in my hand. A look of anger and disappointment appeared on Bachman's face as he had not calculated my trickery. Since I first played with him, I was given the opportunity to choose pawns. Contrary to the law of averages, I always lost. It was only after I had lost heart that I dared to wonder how he had achieved such success. With sleight of hand, he always fielded a choice of 2 black pawns. Even in such a trifle as a game of chess, he sought to gain an advantage. We took our places at the table. Only culture and civilization separated the gladiators from bloodshed. David moved and stood next to his father-in-law, as befitted a loyal vassal. I made an initial pawn move. He immediately responded with a knight move. This assured me that his tendency to rely on his knights in the opening remained, despite the fact that I had not played with him for 6 years. I made a move with the queenside bishop. He brought out his other knight. This confirmed that he intended to outplay his knights. 3 moves later, my knight landed on the queenside bishop pawn. Got it, I announced quietly. He looked puzzled at his predicament. My knight was ready to take either his king or queen's rook next move. Usually the counter move is for the queen to take the threatening knight. In this game, it would not help him. My bishop was ready to take his queen in response to the attack. Another common counterplay was the king move and sacrifice the queenside rook. Here it could not be. Bachman played his usual hard game, protecting the king and depriving him of the possibility of maneuver. He was trapped into accepting the sacrifice of my knight. And yet he was looking for a way out. His eyes roved over every piece on the board. I leaned back in my chair to savor another taste of brandy. You'll have to accept my knight, Charles. This is your only game. And again he looked at me. Not only for having the audacity to capture his queen, but also for having the audacity to address him as an equal and not as my superior. I continued to wait for the inevitable. Finally, in disgust, he moved his queen and took my knight. Without hesitation, I moved my bishop and captured his queen. I held the queen piece in front of him. I just looked at the piece rubbing against the princess's ebony. Funny thing is, in the other game we're playing, you had another queen, but it still didn't help you, I commented. What are you talking about, Troy? Your queen, the spy you launched into my office, Janet Temple. Your secret agent I had to face. I watched as he belatedly tried to bring his royal bishop into action. I began to lay out the following sequence of events. It took me a while to realize who your queen was, I continued. But once I did, she was easy to neutralize. All I had to do was feed her false information, and I knew she would come back to you. I bring out my queen to start fighting as we continue to play. You see, Chuck, there are 2 sets of books. But the fake counterfeit books show that the bank is in trouble. The public books are real and show that the bank is thriving. I baited you into thinking my bank was in trouble because I knew what your natural reaction would be. The big one always eats the little one. Isn't that what you've always said, Chuck? He had a stunned look on his face at the fact that I had used a patronizing nickname and moved my queen diagonally across the board to capture his queen rook. Once again, I was able to calmly say, "Got it." I've known for almost 2 years that Janet was passing information to you, Chuck. I knew that you forced her into an intimate relationship with me so that I would lower my defenses. I set up several situations where I gave you the right information through Janet. After you were able to thwart my attempts with her information, you trusted her 100%. Then every once in a while I would provide her with a legitimate nugget for you to save her. That kept you on the hook. Bachman moved his king from a dangerous position to the next row. I then moved my queen horizontally across the board, and now his queenside rook was also a victim of the game, since I had removed it. The queen and both crows are gone. You're not doing too well, Chuck, I remarked. But back to Janet. You relied entirely on her reports, and she relied entirely on the information I gave her. You see, I was constantly updating the false forged books to show the gradual decline in the bank's assets. Janet would check the information on her computer and double-check it on mine and then pass it on to you. Janet was never in a position to do a legitimate audit, so I kept passing you false information. It allowed me some respite to repair the initial damage you did. The scary steps I had to take over and over again to build up the necessary margin of safety. I was shelling out every dollar to slip half a point on a stock and then withdraw money from the market and lock in profits. Janet always got the information a little later than she needed to in order to contact you in time, and you had time to squash me like a bug. It must have been frustrating for you to see me slip through your fingers day after day. Of course, for every one of my winnings, you erroneously said that I was losing on 4 or 5 other trades a day. You may have checked and verified the daily trading of the stock in question, and the trading activity report seems to confirm Janet's information. He woodenly took my queenside bishop, and I responded by taking one of his knights. He made a move with his remaining knight, trying to put pressure on my king. I started destroying his pawns with my queen. So, as you can see, Chuck, it won't do anything when the state auditor comes on Monday. The real books will be presented, your information will be noted, and there will be an investigation. The only proof you have is a computer printout from Janet, your and David's second-hand accounts of this information, and Janet herself. There will be no corroborating evidence. The computer from Janet's office and my personal computer are already missing and have been replaced with new ones with only the correct numbers on them. You will never find the hard drives with the erroneous information you relied on. The audit will take about a week and the final report will exonerate me and my bank. Now my rooks were free. The end of the game was approaching. I took his king bishop. As you can see, Chuck, your plan is going almost as well as your chess game. You underestimated me and now you're paying the price. His remaining knight has fallen, and Bachman's last major piece besides his king is his queenside bishop. I moved my king to the dark square. Now his queen bishop would be powerless against my king. With the help of the queen and rook, I began to force his king to retreat. One agonizing move after another, and Bachman would not give way. But I didn't want him to. I wanted his king trapped like a rat, and finally we got it. My next move would checkmate him, and he knew it. His face blazed with anger at the humiliating defeats I had inflicted on him this evening. But there was more to come. So, Chuck, looks like I beat you at chess for the first time. The moral of the story is this: never underestimate the lengths your daughter's horny boyfriend will go to in order to score points with her father, including losing a chess game. I guess I can consider myself lucky I didn't go on a hunting safari in Alaska with you and your drunken friends. The thought of having to hang around you and suck up to you for a week still makes me want to puke to this day. Thank God David had no problem kissing your ass every day. David automatically lunged toward me, wanting to get into a physical confrontation, until he saw the anticipation in my eyes. I think he realized that if he and I got into a fight, I wouldn't stop until one of us was either seriously injured or dead. He wasn't ready for that level of action. I stared at him for a while, then insultingly brushed it off as a real threat and continued my dissertation. I know that attaching Janet to me was your idea, Chuck. But which one of you got the idea to put her in my bed, you or David? None of them admitted to it. I guess I'll never know how it happened. Maybe one of you was at fault. Maybe you both, independently of each other, gave Janet a hint to try to spark a friendship. Or maybe Janet did it on her own initiative. What I do know is that I'm being torn apart again by the reminder of the betrayal of a girl I cared about. What a brilliant idea to throw me off balance while you plot to steal my bank from me. Not only would I have to relive the agony, but I would have to experience the humiliation anew every day. So does that piss you off, Chuck? The fact that I live to fight another day? The fact that my very existence reminds you of the sins you committed against my father? Normally, if I pissed you off, that would be cause for concern, because even if I foiled your plan and saved my bank, I could expect you to regroup and launch another attack. But that's where the genius of a queen like Janet comes in, I continued to lecture Bachman, as if he couldn't stop hearing about the wreck I'd made for him. I know she also told you about the Sorrento oil reserves that my bank was so counting on to bring it back to the black. Just imagine, an oil field estimated at several million barrels that has yet to be developed. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it, Chuck? And it's too good to be true, Chuck. Once again, I fed you false information through Janet. I created Soren oil reserves out of thin air, Chuck. You were so eager to believe everything Janet told you that you didn't do your due diligence. Why would I? I certainly wasn't cunning enough to outsmart you. I've never been devious before. And you knew I couldn't dare to make a false move. Therefore, everything I invested in had to be in good faith. Thanks to me, you have seen a vision of the mythical El Dorado. With a startup capital investment of $100 billion, you would make billions of dollars in profits. The fact that you would destroy me was just the cherry on top. You flipped through all the test field reports and engineering reports that promised unquestionable success. All those reports from my desk that Janet stole for your benefit. All those reports from straw figures created by me. They existed only in my imagination and from my hands. But after creating enough papers, I pushed you closer and closer to the edge until you jumped off the cliff voluntarily. In the course of all the international business deals I've had to enter into, I've had ample opportunity to discover enough unethical businessmen who would help me pull a scam on you for a percentage. With their help, I set up a number of shell corporations on shore. Every time you bought Sorrent stock, your money came back to me. I created a false bidding war that kept the stock rising and caused you to lose your money much faster. All the debts you took on caused the price of Buckman Incorporated stock to fall. So I bought them cheap with your own money. Through a syndicate of holding companies and mutual funds, I now own the majority of your company's stock, Chuck. Charles Bachman's complexion had undergone a remarkable change. Instead of a flushed face of anger, he now had a shocked look on his face as I continued to pound him with the hammer. Within a month, a new board of directors for Buckman Incorporated will be formed. All of them will be selected by me. The first order of business will be to remove you, Chuck, on a vote of no confidence. The second would be to elect me chairman of the board. The third is to change the name of the company to Harrison Williams Incorporated in honor of my father. I realize you'll still be rich because of your holdings, Chuck, but your legacy is gone. And that's what matters to you. The days of you being the benevolent despot of this community are gone. Your lavish estate, the Rolls Royces you and your wife drive, the condos you own, the private jet. All of this, titled in the company's name for tax purposes, will belong to me. I will, however, allow you to keep your mistress. Charles visibly cringed at my revelation that I knew about his secret life. David watched stunned as his unbending father-in-law's clay feet appeared. You'll spend the rest of your life complaining about me to the FBI, the SEC, and every other law enforcement agency you can think of, and it won't get your money back. I have covered myself with countless layers of protection and continue to add them. You will grow old and bitterly regret your powerlessness to unravel my affairs. The political influence you once enjoyed will fade, and you will be left all alone, screaming in an empty room for revenge. I finished the last drops of brandy. I leaned forward toward Charles Bachman, who was now gulping air like a fish out of water. I moved my queen to the last row. See, Chuck, you've been wrong all along in your analogy of business and nature. It's not the big one that eats the little one. It's the fast one that eats the slow one. I reached up with one finger and slowly tipped at king. Shahmat, I whispered the etymological Persian term that had morphed over the centuries into checkmate. The king is captured. I left the room without bothering to look at its occupants. The events that followed were dramatic and kept the town abuzz with gossip for months. I did oust Charles Bachman and David Porter. Finding themselves out of their comfort zone, they turned on each other, blaming each other for their downfall. Mrs. Bachman divorced her husband after publicly exposing his next mistress and proceeded to beat millions out of him in divorce proceedings. As I suspected, Charles tried to get the authorities to investigate my case, but to no avail. With the loss of his wealth, he also lost political power, since no one admired him unless he was backed by money. His mistress left him in search of a better deal, and he himself entered into a series of relationships that continued to send him into a downward financial spiral. It was pathetic to watch him continue to pose as a VIP while he was the laughingstock of the town. The town was shocked when he woke up one morning and learned that he had committed suicide by shooting himself. Only family members were invited to the funeral. Stacy and her sister flew in to attend the funeral and flew back right after it was over. She didn't try to contact me. I knew she blamed me for my father's death. However, David Porter attempted to disrupt the funeral to convince Stacy to stop the divorce proceedings she initiated while in California. After the debacle, he spoke publicly about his relationship with Janet Temple. Yes, my Janet Temple. They went to an undisclosed location. Power is an aphrodisiac, Henry Kissinger once said. I tend to agree with him. 23 months after the successful campaign against Charles Bachman, I was still the lucky recipient of the attention of many beautiful ladies. I was under no false illusions that I had somehow become more handsome, more masculine, or that my personality had undergone a much-needed makeover. No, all I represented was a potential source of endless money, security, and prestige. Was I upset about that? Not at all. I knew what the game was, and so did the ladies. We were satisfying desires for physical connections, and I was damn sure there would be no emotional connection with any of them. I made sure that any financial obligations imposed on me by my lovely ladies were minimal and transient. In my shallow world, that was enough to get by. Still, sometimes, deep into the night, I would leave my slumbering partner for the night and spend my time just watching the quiet city courtyard from my third-floor window. Still looking for someone to believe in. Standing like a sentry over my moonlit city that was experiencing a renaissance. Taking over Harrison Williams Enterprises, I approached a number of manufacturing companies about moving to Camden to end the city's history of being known as a one-company town. By offering commercial loans at a very low rate and convincing state officials to offer various tax incentives, a large number of companies decided to take advantage of these offers. As a result, the city of Camden experienced a boom. I originally envisioned that Buckman's Financial Plaza would soon resemble what downtown once looked like, a desolate concrete ghost town synonymous with Charles Buckman's failure. But I commissioned a study and concluded that it was prudent to allow Buckman Financial Plaza to continue in business and thrive. People psychologically wanted and needed options. People like Fred Carter, a classmate of mine who ran a Ford dealership. Fred would have resented having to obediently submit to me to run his banking business at Camden Bank and Trust. But if he had been offered to do business with Buckman's Savings and Loans, he would have been as fit as a fiddle. I didn't care which organization got the money as long as it came back to me. Oh, I did indulge my ego. The Camden Country Club has done the unprecedented thing of rescinding a member's expulsion and granting me membership. I guess after it was revealed that Harrison Williams Enterprises was thinking of placing a landfill next to the golf course, I thought my opinion might sway the Harrison Williams Board of Directors. I seemed to notice a few hostile and annoyed looks every time I came in. Went back to the country club, but as long as they left me alone, I left them alone. However, for the sake of vacuousness, I made sure to encourage minority membership and convert the office into a daycare center as soon as it was remodeled. I also had dinner every night at the club to demonstrate my power. I took advantage of the situation and ensured that Thomas Clark, the country club manager, was given full autonomy to run the club. He listened to my proposal to upgrade the restaurant to a 5-star establishment. I now had a place where I could bring my business lunch partners for a nice meal or a round of golf, or both. One of my fondest memories is playing golf with a woman, the chief operating officer of a corporation I wanted to do business with. She hit her second shot on a par 5 dogleg on the 13th hole. Somehow we ended up together in the thicket of the woods and found a new source of entertainment on the golf course. At least I finally got to enjoy the game of golf. I was finally able to grasp a bit of the zen of golf, albeit in a different form than expected. Hey, you enjoy your view of the hole-in-one and I'll enjoy mine. In fact, the same COO came back for another visit and, oh miracle, hit his shot right back into the same thicket, causing us to have to disappear into the woods again. We were having a leisurely dinner at the clubhouse, enjoying the risky ambiguities involved in playing golf, when Stacy showed up. To say I was confused is to say nothing. I realized that the piece of food strung on my fork had fallen off while I was holding the appliance in the air. My companion frowned, interrupting the conversation, and turned to watch a charming woman approaching our table as I put my fork down. She wasn't the only one. The entire dining room fell silent as everyone focused on Stacy. God, I hadn't seen or heard from her since she'd left 2 years ago. And now the weight of the aftermath of what had happened to her father and David was bearing down on me. I mentally prepared myself for a confrontation. I would try to deal with it as best I could. At least I owed it to her. Her attention was directed solely at me as she walked toward me. I don't know if she was intentionally or not ignoring my dinner companion, but Stacy didn't seem interested in the fact that I wasn't alone and that we were in a crowded country club dining room. She was now standing by my chair, towering over me as I prepared myself for the humiliation to come. Then she knelt down beside my chair and said, "Many years ago I made a terrible mistake. I'm here to correct it if you'll let me. Troy Williams, will you marry me?" You couldn't help but notice the sincerity in her voice or her face. Somehow she was willing to forget how I had destroyed her father, her family's fortune, her husband. All she cared about was that she loved me and was willing to put everything on the line for me. For a moment, I wondered if could I be as forgiving? Would I be able to let go of the pain and be with the woman I so desperately wanted? Would my ego allow me to counter the betrayal of my revenge with her public subterfuge? Were the ghosts of my parents peering over my shoulder, begging me to let go of my past and connect with the only woman I could truly love? I was well aware of what awaited the unintended audience. Sitting across from me, my dinner companion had a whole range of expressions on her face. There was the shocked, stunned look with which she reacted to Stacy's suggestion. There was the expression of jealous hostility at this breach of etiquette that could only occur between two beautiful women in direct competition, and something hidden in the clinical detachment with which she watched the events unfold. Now I was at the table. Now I felt the pressure that every woman feels when proposing. This is exactly how Stacy must have felt when I stumped her years ago. How could I feel my brain overflowing with all the reasons to say yes and no at the same time? I so desperately wanted my heart to say yes, and my fears wanted me to say no. And I was pressured to answer publicly, just like Stacy had been pressured that fateful night so long ago. No. I wasn't sure I'd actually said it until I saw Stacy's calm expression crumble and tears come to her eyes as she staggered up and, retaining the last vestiges of dignity, walked out of the dining room with her head held proudly high, ignoring all the gawkers. I don't think I've ever hated myself as much as I did in that moment. An excited murmur ran through the room as I quietly signaled manager Thomas Clark to come to my table. "Yes, Mr. Williams," he inquired. "Thomas, I know how impossible it is to keep things private in this age of social media. So I need you to let everyone know how unhappy I will be if I hear a word about this on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or any other site that embarrasses Miss Bachman," I instructed him quietly. "I understand, Mr. Williams and I will take care of it." He walked out from behind his desk and headed straight for Fred Carter's desk. Less than a minute into the conversation, I saw Fred blush and start furiously deleting something from his smartphone. When he finished, Fred looked at me with a concerned expression on his face. Thomas Clark had already left for a neighboring table. After a few minutes, Thomas Clark informed me that if anyone was foolish enough to discuss the event publicly, they risked incurring my wrath. After what I had done to Charles Bachman and David Porter, no one wanted to test my mettle. I turned my attention back to my dinner companion. There was a strange look of bewilderment on her face. "Well, I've never had a date like this before," she looked me in the eye. "Really?" I finished the last of my wine. "It happens to me all the time," I explained sharply, hoping this joking reply would hide the emotional cauldron raging inside me as I looked at her again. She jumped me before we even got to the car. When we got to my bed, we had the best night ever. When dawn broke, we sat at the kitchen table, not washing our eyes and tiredly sharing cups of coffee. "I think I'll call a cab to take me to the airport so I can leave early for my office." "What's your hurry?" I asked. "I'm in no hurry, I just know when it's time to leave." Last night I was pissed at that woman for disrespecting me and proposing to you in front of me. So I drove you home and shook the shit out of you. But 3 things make me realize that we can't have a future like this. 1. This woman really loves you enough to make herself do something so public. 2. I could never do that for any man. So whatever we are, this is not a case where I'm willing to go that far for you. I only had to nod in response to her comments, as I was in agreement with her. She was fun to be with, but we both knew we weren't right for each other forever. You mentioned 3 things. What's the third? I asked. Last night, everyone in this room could look at her and tell she was in love with you. I kept looking at you and could tell you were in love with her. In love or in business, don't take on something you can't succeed at. I've already lost that battle. As I weighed her words and considered my next steps, I watched the cab drive away, taking her to the airport. The wait was less than 24 hours. Stacy reappeared at the country club as I dined alone, got down on one knee again, and publicly proposed to me again. I was once again going through a turmoil of conflicting emotions as I was once again put in front of a choice. Somehow I managed to say no again, and again my negative answer caused Stacy the pain of rejection, and she slowly walked away, trying to keep her composure, tears streaming down her face. The room stirred again with excitement, and I called Thomas Clark over and asked him to repeat my favor from the night before. I knew it was impossible to keep people from whispering about the event, but I could still try to limit the damage to local gossip only. On the 3rd night, the dining room was crowded with people waiting for Stacy to arrive. They were not disappointed as she showed up and proposed to me again. Unlike the onlookers, Stacy was disappointed as I again refused to accept her marriage proposal. This time, Thomas Clark didn't have to instruct people not to air anything they witnessed. He automatically went into damage control mode. Stacy showed up the next night and left disappointed. And the next night again. And the next. And the next. The event continued every night. A week went by. Then a month. And Stacy continued to show up every night to propose to me. I couldn't understand how she managed to endure so much pain and rejection. But every night she showed up, hoping I would say yes, and every night she left with her heart torn apart by my rejection. Her friends begged her to stop, to save what little she had left and start over far away from our hometown. She continued to ignore them. Then a few brave men approached me and suggested that I stop eating lunch at the country club to put an end to this farce. I ignored them. Night after night it went on. One change was that I never asked him to dinner at the club again. At least I was able to keep the conflict to just the 2 of us and not expose anyone else to the spectacle. It was Friday night and I was waiting. By this time, the initial buzz from Stacy and I's little dramatic performance had turned to a lukewarm agreement with the crowd. Many had become oblivious to Stacy's hopeful comings and sad goings. She showed up right on time, remembering to dress for the occasion and not giving up hope that she could convince me to change my mind. She came up and started to kneel when I raised my hand to stop her from kneeling. Stacy, today marks 1 year since you came back and asked me to marry you. Every night I say no, but you keep coming back. How long are you going to keep this up? It was noticeable that she was excited about the change of ritual. But recovering herself, she said, Troy, I will continue to come here every night and propose to you in the hope that you will finally agree that we belong together. And it doesn't matter if it happens tonight or tomorrow or years from now. I will do everything in my power to right the wrong of not accepting your proposal. The heartfelt reply struck her with sincerity. You know your batting average is pretty bad in this case. She ignored my futile attempt to make the situation light. All I have to do is be right once, and then you and I can spend the rest of our lives batting 1,000. Look, Stacy, I don't have as much practice at this as you do, but maybe I can do it better. Before she realized it, I had already slid off the chair and was kneeling in front of her. My hand reached into my pocket and snatched the object. Now that everything was clear, Stacy screamed, Oh my God, 3! Tears of joy sprang from her eyes, and her hands reached for my mouth in disbelief as I opened the box and presented the ring to her. Stacy Ellen Bachman. Yes, she shouted. You? Yes. Getting married. Yes! 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 Iya? Yes! 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 Oh God, yes, I'll marry you. In a rush of adrenaline, she lifted me to my feet, pulled me to her, and started kissing me, and the hall erupted in wild applause. She sobbed in my ear. "Thank you, Troy. Thank you for making me so happy." Somehow, despite her holding on to me tightly, I managed to slip the ring onto her finger, which entailed another round of blazing kisses. I didn't think I could get her to unhook herself from me, but eventually her girlfriends, who were present, pulled her off me while they oohed and awed over the ring. And of course, they began wedding planning expeditiously. I took Thomas Clark aside and told him to put all the bills on my account. Yeah, even that bastard Fred Carter. I also told him to get that rare bottle of cognac I'd inherited when I took over all of Charles Bachman's assets. It was time to finish the bottle with a toast, which I shared with my bride-to-be. It's time to let go of the past. I watched her as she aimed at me like an erratic kamikaze. She was holding a large yellow-reddish object in her hands. I tried to prepare myself for the possibility that if she decided to throw it at me at close range, I would try to anticipate the trajectory it would take to hit my body. Instead, she held out her hand for me to take the thing from her. "Peace," she announced proudly. "Peach," I corrected her. I emphasized that cheech to explain to her how to pronounce the fruit. She nodded with the confidence of a 3-year-old and repeated, "Peace." Finished with that task, she turned and waddled back to the waiting baskets full of ripe, juicy fruit. If history repeats itself, in a few moments I will be the owner of another peach. I gently squeezed the peach in my hand and smelled it. It was ripe, ready to eat. I dipped the fuzzy fruit into the bucket of watery ice that held the few bottles of beer I'd rewarded myself with for finishing the harvest. Next, using a penknife, I cut the fruit in half, then into quarters and removed the peach pit. I then cut it into smaller pieces so Karen, my child, could enjoy the tasty treat. Karen returned with another peach and held it out to me. "Peace, Daddy!" she demanded. Next to me, the love of my life started laughing at us. I looked at Stacy and smiled at her, then returned my attention to Karen. "Peach," I repeated, holding out a small piece of fruit to her. Her eyes glistened as she tasted the fruit, and the pulp and juice smeared her face. Somehow she always managed to leave the uneaten peel that got on my shirt. "Don't feed her too much, it's too close to dinner time," Stacy reminded me. "I won't, sweetheart," I said, taking the opportunity to take another sip of nectar of the gods, and the cold amber liquid slid down my throat. "And no more beer, or you'll be completely useless while I raving you tonight." "Honey." She's 3 years old. "She has no idea what that word means," reminded Stacy. "It's never too early to instill that habit. I don't want her blabbing. She's not supposed to repeat words in public." "Okay, I understand what you're saying. But as long as I keep eating your peach, you can have one of mine." I held out a peach slice to her as a mischievous grin appeared on her face. "I intend to let you eat my peach all night long," she smiled teasingly. "Just remember, I have to unload these baskets at the farmer's market early in the morning." "Troy, that means we need to start early today so you'll be ready to go in the morning." I realized from the lecherous look on her face that she had plans for me for the morning as well. "But to help you, get one of those kids you hired as a helper and have him do the job for you tomorrow. I think something will come up that will require our undivided attention." I smiled back and then looked back at the lot where our residence was located. When we got married, I had agreed to stay in the bank building, but Stacy had been adamant that she wasn't going to raise her family in the bank building. I called my old family friend, Mrs. Fuller. She was past the age where she was having trouble taking care of her farm. Added to this was the fact that her daughter insisted on moving west to live with her. I ended up buying the Fuller farm and a few other parcels of land that would allow me to be fully employed as a gentleman farmer, but not overworked. All of my business ventures had good managers who kept an eye on my assets, and I continued to make sure the engine was running efficiently. Now it didn't take every waking second. Soon I was learning about crop rotation, irrigation, and pest control. Stacy was hard at work renovating our new homestead, and it wasn't long before she informed me that one of the rooms needed to be converted into a nursery. Karen came into our lives, and any doubts any of us had about our marriage were instantly dispelled. Ironically, our happiness had irritated the locals who had watched our trials and tribulations up close. They couldn't understand why I was willing to marry a girl who had rejected me. And they couldn't understand why Stacy would marry me after I rejected her. I could write an entire encyclopedia trying to convey our reasoning and feelings, or I could just say that I love her and she loves me, and we finally caught ourselves at the right time. I sleep well. I'm not haunted by the ghosts of my parents. Why should they haunt me? They only wanted what was best for me, and that eventually happened. I'm not haunted by the ghost of Charles Bachman. He can't hurt me or Stacy anymore, so it doesn't matter. Same with David Porter and Janet. The only person who can hurt me is Stacy, and deep down I know that won't happen again. The lessons we learned were painful, at a terrible cost, dearly bought and dearly cherished. The sudden epiphany I experienced as I watched Karen bring me another peach was striking in its simplicity. Karen climbed into my lap and with all the God-given innocence in her eyes looked into mine, holding out the fruit to me. "Peace, Daddy!" I kissed her. "Peace." I said yes. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.